your support. And now, our guest speaker really needs no introduction. He has been the executive director of the Boulder JCC since 2010. But what you may not know is that he got a dual master's in Jewish studies at NYU and nonprofit management, but his thesis was in Holocaust commemoration. He's a fabulous boss, and I guess a fabulous bike rider. So please welcome Jonathan Lev.
All right, we're gonna get the slide deck running. Thank you, Lauren. I'm so glad that so many people could be here, both in person. I know there's a number on live stream, so welcome to everyone for being here tonight. How many people in the room here got a chance to see the movie last week? Okay, just trying to get context for how much people know about the Ride for the Living. So I'm going to talk about the Ride for the Living, but I'm also going to talk a lot about our experiences in Krakow. And when I say our, it was me and my wife Lindsay, who's here tonight, got a chance to be able to go to Krakow this past summer for 8 days. And the experience there was an incredible opportunity to really explore Jewish life and immerse ourselves into a community that I knew very little about before I got there. And so I want to start with a little story. It was 6:15 in the morning on July 1st, and I boarded a bus, and I got handed a box of food, and I walked onto this bus, and I was like, yeah, I'm a little bit hungry, I should probably eat, it's going to be a long day, and I'm sitting there eating food as we're riding the hour-long ride to get to the gates of Auschwitz. And I'm sitting there contemplating the juxtaposition of me sitting there being able to choose to eat and choosing to go to Auschwitz. And then I said to myself, well, I'm thirsty. It's really hot outside, and I'll go into that more later. And so I should get a drink, and so I got some water, and I drank some water. And all the time I'm sitting in an air-conditioned bus on my way to Auschwitz, getting ready to be able to go on a bike ride from Auschwitz. So that's where everything sort of was sitting for me for almost this entire trip, was this contrast of where things are today and where I sit as a Jewish person today and where the past sits. And how do we bring those things together, especially in Poland, where Jewish life is really complicated now in some ways. And even seeing what Jewish life is complex to understand, and how memory exists is complex. So I want to bring you into Krakow itself. There is a Jewish quarter in Krakow. It's a really small area, but it's a few blocks around. You can walk it probably within about 20 minutes circumference, you've done the entire area. But it is a very densely packed area. Sort of think Jewish quarter in Israel, kinda, in Jerusalem. And one of the neat things about it is preserved in many ways since the Holocaust. So the buildings are still there, and you see remnants of what Jewish life was wherever you walk. So an example of this is when you look up on different doorposts, you can see when this originally was built. You can sort of see the wood of where the mezuzah was. There's a new mezuzah that's there, but everywhere you walk, every single house has these remnants of this memory of Jewish life being present, but it's not that Jews live there, that many Jews live there. There's only 2,000, they think, that live in Krakow right now. The other thing that's present is there were 150 synagogues in Krakow. Now, a synagogue was a status symbol, is something we learned on an incredible walking tour. So many different people had private synagogue. So it was like if you were a wealthy person, you had your own personal synagogue. Can you imagine? Like this was the thing. So we walked into a little courtyard. And somebody said to us, "Oh, you should check this out." We were with someone, and she said, "Oh, I'll just ring a bell and see if any of these people will answer." And one of the person answered, and she said, "Oh, we want to check out the courtyard." We go into this courtyard, and there was the remnants of a synagogue that's now a house. But everywhere you walk, how you know that there's synagogues all have these arched windows. The other thing they have is on the top of them, right in the center, is a circular piece where God could look down and see and get into every synagogue. So you have these little notes of memory that are present wherever you are. But then there's also the places where those synagogues still exist and are either a museum or a functioning synagogue. So of the 150, there's 6 or 7 that are really used in some capacity, and there's a few more that are sort of ancillary, but everything else has been converted to shops or other things. And the synagogues that are there range in time from when they existed, from the 1400s to, that was the old synagogue, and then there's the new synagogue, which was from the 1800s. So it's just like the time frame is also interesting in terms of memory there. And then you walk into a cafe, and you realize you just walked through where the ark was, and that's where they made the doorway. And you see, it's a cafe, people are drinking beers, and they're drinking some tea, and then you look on the wall, and there's the frescoes of Jewish life. So how do we deal with memory there, and how do they deal with it is really, really challenging in the ways to think about it. I want to tell you a few different anecdotes throughout my talk today, and I'm going to bounce around a little bit because there's a lot of different pieces of the trip that we went on. So if I jump around, try to stay with me, and then there will definitely be time for questions at the end. There's the old cemetery, which again was from the 1400s, and the new cemetery, which was from the 1800s. The interesting thing with this old cemetery, during the Holocaust, much of it was destroyed. They were able to restore it. If you look, in the bottom right there's some of the restored pieces of gravestones. But what they did to preserve the memory was they took the broken gravestones and made them into the wall. So the memory is kept there, and they're able to do that. And this is connected to one of the oldest synagogues in the area. And where we got a chance to really learn about the way that things look now throughout Poland was this incredible museum called the Galicia Museum. The Galicia Museum is basically a museum of photographs. And the photographs of today, of sites that were connected to the Holocaust or pre-Holocaust Jewish life in Poland. And what it showed was there were places where there were concentration camps, and now there's just one stone in the middle of an open field. And that's all that's left. There are other places where there is a synagogue that is in ruins in a small community. There's another picture where there was a synagogue that was a storefront. And each of these different pieces, when we were meeting with the executive director, Kuba, we got a chance to sit down with for about 3 hours and toured around this museum. He was really sharing how in Poland it's really complicated because the Polish people were victims themselves. Some of them were perpetrators, but they were attacked from 2 sides, from both Russia and Germany. So they felt, when they're preserving memory of the Holocaust, they're also looking at themselves of, what about us? We were victims too. So who's in charge of the Holocaust memory? Who's in charge of the the memory of the Polish people. And then when they started really processing and internalizing their own memory of their own identity, why are we going to just remember the Holocaust as the bad thing that happened? Like, this entire thing was horrible for all of us. So nobody really knew what to do with it for a very, very long time. And it's only more recent that things have been able to be more identified outside of Auschwitz, which has been a museum for a very, very long time at this point. In addition to the Galicia Museum in Krakow, there's also the Schindler Factory, which is actually less about the Jews saved by Schindler and that experience, and it is a history of the Jews of Krakow. Fascinating history, and goes through the entire when people got there, and then the establishment of the ghetto and the movement of the ghetto and what happened there. But it's a really interesting way that they've taken this place where so many people know. It's probably one of the most well-known pieces of Krakow history, unfortunately, and have made it into some place of memory for all of the Jewish people in Krakow. And so it's not just to this one element. And I think that that's some of the different ways that memory itself is being preserved in the community. The other way that we noticed was just walking the streets. You know, the cobblestone streets that are there, you see little symbols of Jewish life present in the wrought iron gates. And these things are still there and present. So while you're walking throughout the city of Krakow, and it's like this homage to what Jewish life was, you know, in this Renaissance period of klezmer music and other things, you go into the town square, and there's and this is playing. It's almost like a weird Disney World in some ways. It's like this museum of the Jews, a snapshot in time. And what's interesting about it, and Lindsay and I kept on having these conversations, like, is this weird? Is this like are we being put up on a pedestal of this is what a Jewish person is and this is what Jewish life is? Because people came to this particular area to get klezmer music, to eat borscht, to eat potato pancakes. Like, these things were just part of their experience, and most of these people were not Jewish. And there's these, tourist buses and like tour the Jewish life, and so it's a really interesting thing. And is it bad? Is it good? Is it good for us? I can't answer these things. I think they're hard to answer in terms of how we think about it. But right next to this, so right next to all of this sort of past Jewish life, is the Krakow JCC. And the Krakow JCC, just functionally, it's a 3-story building. They have multiple different classrooms and spaces and this nice outdoor courtyard area, almost similar to what we have here, just compressed into city living. And the Krakow JCC was founded actually by the Prince of Wales. The Prince of Wales came to Krakow, was meeting with and the question was Prince of Wales when, and it was, I think, in like 2005-ish. Yes, Charles. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, there is a new prince. You're totally right. Good point. So yes, when is a good question then. Yes, definitely Charles. Charles came there, and he met with 3 Holocaust survivors and said, if you needed one thing, what would you need right now? And they said, we need a place to get together. And that's what happened to start the Krakow JCC. And in 2008, it opened. And they hired their CEO, whose name is Jonathan Ornstein, who was an expat living in Poland for many years. And he still is the CEO there, and founded what became the Krakow JCC. Now, who was the Krakow JCC there to serve? Was it there to serve these Holocaust survivors? Jonathan felt like there was probably some more Jewish people present, but no one really knew where people were other than the ultra-Orthodox, who they had their own sort of separate community. And as they opened, more and more of these strange phone calls came in. And there was a phone call that came in that said, you know, I was told to call you because my mother on every Friday came home with this braided bread. And somebody said to me, well, that's probably challah that they came home with. And I wonder if there's something of Jewish heritage in your past. And lo and behold, there was, and they learned that they were Jewish. And this is not an atypical story. There were story after story. We talked to the chief rabbi of Krakow and of Poland, and these stories are commonplace. Because religious identity and Jewish identity was so hidden for so long that these people lived in hiding, and it now was moving a generation past. And what was interesting is these 20 and 30-year-olds were beginning to reclaim that Jewish identity for themselves. And it was beginning to become not a thing of we shouldn't be, but it was actually a thing of pride where we could be. Not everyone felt that. Some people felt shame, and every Jewish person feels their own thing about being Jewish. But it was a really interesting thing of how they've come to be. And this is just a classroom space in the JCC where you can just tell it's the same as everyone sitting here and coming to a program. They have the same kind of spaces there. But what's different about it right now, and what made it different about being there last summer, was being part of the war in Ukraine. And the Krakow JCC has done unbelievable work in terms of housing refugees, as well as serving Ukrainians both in Poland and over the border in Ukraine, and partnering with other aid organizations as well as JCCs that are in Ukraine. They had, as of last summer, so this data is a little bit old, they had served 100,000 Ukrainians through their work. And then, I can't remember the exact number, I don't know if you remember, Lindsay, how many people were being housed currently by them. It was in the hundreds. It was like 350. They had rented out an entire castle that they had to get funding for from the States mostly, and they were housing 350 or so, I think it was, Ukrainian refugees. But when you house somebody, you can't just house them. You have to take care of them. You have to feed them. So they converted one of their classrooms to a pantry, where every day people would line up, and if you actually look in the right corner, the left, you can see people lining up for getting the food. But what's interesting on the right side, you have an event happening going on in the courtyard, and the people coming in for the pantry. These things are happening right next to each other in this community because everything's so tight. And one of the things that they've started to do is similar to Bridge House that does catering. They now have actually employed some of these people who are living there. Most of them are women and children because the men are fighting the war, and these refugees, so the women are with the children, so the women can't work because they're taking care of the kids. So they've found some daycare through the JCC and been able to help the women be able to work a bit by doing some catering. Because they tasted, one day the women just decided they wanted to do something nice, and then they made this amazing food, and they said, well, we should do something with this. So it's a pretty neat thing that they're doing. They serve, there's currently around 800 members of the JCC. So it's not a huge community in terms of numbers, but remember, these are each an individual that is now Jewish in Krakow again. And is part of the rebirth of Jewish life there. And while this is all going on in Krakow, you're right next to about 60 minutes away from Auschwitz. So I'm going to touch on this a brief moment. As part of the trip, going to Auschwitz is the first day of the trip. They bring everyone to Auschwitz, and you go to Birkenau as well. And I had been there when I was 16, and this was now 30 years later. And each time I went, something different struck me. So I want to just share, my personal anecdote from this time. Scale. Not that I could comprehend scale, I was able to feel scale. And the way in which I felt scale was some of the numbers that I was actually able to look, I understood better. So 1.3 million people going through the gates of Auschwitz, and 1.1 million died. And seeing all of the different artifacts, and these are pictures that many of you have seen in books and other things, and when you go there, they're right there in front of you, and maybe you've seen them at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and in different places. But one of the things that really struck me this time was this. It was a room with a book. It was the biggest book I've ever seen. And the pages were filled with names. They wrote out all of the names that they know, and then wrote out, as many other anonymous, and so 6 million names were listed in this one book that filled an entire room, front, back, and you opened it and you could see, and I think the page I was opening it was, my last name, and just seeing, how many people were with that last name. So it was an experience going there, and something that I feel like is a critical part of what makes this ride so powerful, was you sort of start day one of this trip by doing this piece of the experience. And then the next morning, you go to Auschwitz again. So this is technically Auschwitz II, Birkenau. So there's the Auschwitz, which is, everyone knows the gate where it says, and where the ride starts is actually from Birkenau. And I just want to start with a little video of Jonathan Ornstein's, a piece of his introduction from that day.
They were tied to a difficult past, persecution, crusades, Inquisition, Holocaust. Every day this is the place that we start, but we don't stay here. Every day we move forward, we don't quit being Jewish. We continue to live by the values, especially focused on life, empathy, helping others, and we leave the tragedy behind us. We don't allow our difficult history as Jews to determine our future.
So one of the things that I think is emphasized by the work of Jonathan and his team and the community is that we are looking forward. And a lot of people coming to Poland think of it as the past. Like, I'm going to see Auschwitz, I'm going to see what was, I'm going to see what happened. And they're really trying to reframe it so that the people who are there, the Jewish life that is there, and this is throughout Eastern Europe, is actually, I was with a number of JCC directors from Hungary and from Ukraine and the Maldives just recently for a DEC conference, and I was talking with them about the way in which people see Jewish life now, and so many people look at it as a dead place for Jewish life, and they're reframing that together. So here we are, the morning of the ride. So this is, past my eating the breakfast and drinking the water. It was on record the hottest day in Krakow's history at 97 degrees the morning that it was. So this was probably 8:30 in the morning, and it was at least 90 degrees already. So yes, schwitzing all over the place. But they really took care of us. I have to say, this is an incredibly well-organized ride, and I joke about some of the things, but the team that helps put this together is top-notch. So Lindsay and I got ourselves ready, and they have bikes for you. So for anyone interested in going, Rabbi Mark from our community is going this summer. I know a few other people are looking at going. So feel free to talk to us about it, but pretty much anyone could do this ride. It is completely flat. So coming from Boulder, I was worried. I'd never done a ride more than 20 miles in my life. I'm not a bike rider. I may look like it sometimes, but I am not at all. And same thing with my wife. We both sort of joked about it. People are like, are you training before this? And neither of us did any training, which I'm not sure was the best option, but it worked. So what I like about this picture, other than it's a great picture of Lindsay, is in her glasses, you can see the reflection, and it's sort of a great reminder of where you are. And in some ways, it was this joyful, fun ride that everyone's camaraderie, and we're all in this together. And this was at mile 50, where I think if we didn't run through the sprinkler about 10 times, people were going to pass out. But I made the rule that at each point of a water station, I had to drink an entire sports drink, which was, it must have been 95% sugar. Drank the entire sports drink and bring one with me between the pieces. So that's how I stay hydrated. But you can see everyone sort of was in this together, and groups, the sort of peloton the peloton is the group of cyclists, got stretched out this year more than usual because of the heat, because people stopped for longer in different spots. There was always someone with you and having a conversation, other than the time that Lindsay raced ahead because she decided that she wanted to get to the next stop, and I didn't know that because I was talking with Jonathan and we were just talking shop, and she's like, I'm bored, I'm gonna go up. And then for the next 10 miles, I ended up with a different group of people. But other than that, we did this bike ride together. You can see one of the neat things with it is we all got to bike into Krakow together through the streets, and there were people cheering, and I got asked a question of, did you feel any anti-Semitism while you were on that ride? Because people have heard stories from other trips. No, we only felt love. And what's amazing is the jersey that you see here is explicit with what we're doing and why we're doing this ride, and not being shy about being Jewish. So we get into Krakow, and we get to the end of this ride, and of course we had to do our congratulatory jump pose, and drink branded beer. Because that's what you do at the end of a 60-mile bike ride where everyone's dehydrated, is you drink a beer. apparently. That's the thing to do. But we got to celebrate. It was about 7 hours of riding, so it's not a fast ride. For anyone who's a cyclist, that is a very leisurely pace. And what was that? Yeah. And at the end of it, a couple hours after getting back, is an incredible event. So you're super tired and everything, and you go back and you take a shower, and you come into a Shabbat dinner that's the largest Shabbat dinner since the Holocaust in Eastern Europe, with 600 people. So an incredible experience where the chief rabbi is there, and it's actually where the CEO met his wife 1 year at this Shabbat dinner. So it's his anniversary every year. Really special time for the community to come together and celebrate. And what's neat about this ride and the time period that they chose to do it is it happens during the Jewish Culture Festival of Krakow. So the Jewish Culture Festival of Krakow, how many people here have been to the Boulder Jewish Festival? Many of you. Okay, some of you have not. So the Boulder Jewish Festival is a one-day festival on the courthouse lawn, on Pearl Street, sort of in the town square, where we've had around 10,000 people come through our event in one day. The Krakow Jewish Festival is a 10-day event with 300 different programs, with around 30,000 people who participate in it. It is the single largest Jewish festival in the world, in Krakow of all places, and was started in 1998 not by people who identify as Jewish or were Jewish. It was actually people who felt like that part of Krakow's history and Jewish life in Poland shouldn't die. And it has never been operated by any Jewish people. So none of the directors of the program, none of the staff, it has always been put on by this group of people to bring this to the community and keep it alive. The festival is incredible, and through amazing connections, I was able to meet the deputy director of the festival and talk to him for a while about sort of how it gets put on, what they do there. And one of the neat things is we got all access past all the different events that were going on during this time. So some of the things that we got to go to, that is spelled correct, it is the Temple Synagogue, not temple like we would spell it. It was the largest progressive synagogue in Krakow, a beautiful, beautiful synagogue. And it was actually the first night that we were in Krakow that we went to this beautiful concert of, it was Songs of the Ghetto. And it was ghettos from all over the world, Rio and Italy and Warsaw. And it was many of the things that, most of the music that came out of these ghettos were love songs. And so here's a little taste of it. Just gives you a little taste of it. Beautiful acoustics in this in the synagogue, with no air conditioning, so really hot. So if you do go, bring a fan. Definitely put that on your packing list. And that was not the day it was 97 degrees. So in addition to sort of these events and programs, one of the neat things that ends up happening as part of this Jewish festival is the way they've engaged the younger generation. And they do this through late night parties that end up in the basement of a pub. So all of the musicians who are part of this festival and do these big concerts during the day, from 12 a.m. to 4 a.m., yep, you heard me right, we go into this cave, And all of a sudden, like, we had no idea what to expect. We just were told, don't miss this. And we went to this, I think it was the Friday night after we had been to this Shabbat dinner, and done this ride. We had not been to this yet, and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired, I can't do it. And then we walk in, and this is what's happening. So because of that, we said, well, this is the place to be. And so we ended up going the next night as well. So, sleeping was definitely not, it was during the day in the morning, but we were pretty busy. I mean, we kept ourselves busy this entire trip. We figured we'd sleep when we got home. So here's a little more of a taste. And the interesting thing about it is that the people who were here were not the Jewish people of Krakow. It was just the young people of Krakow, because this was the cool thing to do that night. So it's just an interesting way in which people are relating to what's happening. In addition to the really, this funky, weird cellar that we were in, there was a presence of the festival all over. So when you walked right into the one of the squares in Krakow, it's where the sort of festival had their main festival tent. One random evening that we walked by, there was a DJ playing just random, and people were just dancing. This was part of the Jewish festival. So it had this eclectic diversity. In addition to, one of the programs was like the debate between the Homentashen and the pierogi, or I don't even remember what it was. But it's like there's fun little things, and then there's lectures by many of the different professors from the universities in Poland come there to speak, as well as all of these fun little things. Because of when the ride was, we actually, and the activities with the ride, we couldn't do most of the programming during the day. So we were only left with these sort of funky night things. So while this, hold on one second. I've got some water. So while we were there for this culture festival, the first day we were there, we sat down at a cafe. I was exhausted, and we're like, oh, let's get a cup of coffee. This guy comes up to us and starts chatting with us and says, yeah, the Jewish festival's great, but have you checked out Festive Alt? I was like, Festive Alt? What's Festive Alt? It is the counter-Jewish festival to the Jewish festival in Krakow, put on by Jews. So, I mean, you can just sense of course, it's like the synagogue you go to, the synagogue you don't, and like that kind of thing. So Festive Alt, it was actually amazingly through some connections. I happen to know the founder of Festive Alt, which I didn't know before I got there. I happened to be part of a fellowship that we were part of together, and we got to know each other, and she invited us to their final night program, which was a performance of Robert the Devil, in that they reconstituted. It's an opera that was by a Jewish composer that they made into a jazz performance with people performing. You can see in the middle the person dressed as the devil. It was such a wild, obscure thing, but it touched on sort of the artsy side of where Jewish life is there. And it was really interesting to sort of talk with the founders, and they have their strong opinions about the culture festival, it's not bad, but it's like, remember who we are now and see what's possible for us to create and be creative. And in many ways, I reflected on our own community of like how great it is that we can do the things that we've done for so long, or have pay homage to the Catskills and have ignited the Catskills and do that kind of thing. But also last night have a Tu B'Shvat Seder where we bring in a speaker from the city of Boulder to speak about circular, oh my gosh, I'm going to mess up this. Circular, what's the word? Thank you. Circular economy, where we can really think about how we use our products and what the impacts on the environment are. So we can do both of these things. And I think we as a community are a great example of the same complexity that lives in Jewish life in Poland. It's like these importance of remembering the past and importance of paying respects to it in some ways, not forget it, and also make sure that we're being creative and lead forward. So I think that that's really, when I walked away from this trip, it was one of the most powerful things that I saw was, I think we're doing that same thing here. It's different. We don't have the same history. It's not as complex. But what each of us carries is. We each have those memories, and as a place where we're sort of an amalgamation of people from everywhere all over the country and world, we have each of those memories that we're bringing into this community that are important for us to bring into our programs, events, and pieces. And we're creating a new Jewish future and new way of operating. So I couldn't end without saying something really important, which is food. So yes, we did eat pierogies. We passed a pierogi shop like the first day we were there, and we started walking. We're like, we wanted dinner, and then we're like, why didn't we go to the pierogi place? And so then we went to the pierogi place. Did you know that one of the national foods is a jelly-filled donut? Interesting, just curious. And then Lindsay's holding what is referred to commonly as communist pizza. It couldn't be called, and it had to be called something, I don't know. It was a French bread. It was like the late night pub snack. It's like French bread with cheese on it and a whole bunch of other things. They had this entire, the place where the meat district was, and they served meat out of this place, had now been converted into 20 different stalls, with each competing for selling you this pizza at 2 a.m. So fascinating little thing. So with that, and hopefully everyone who's here has gotten a pierogi or two themselves, I wanted to open up to questions. So we do have... So Nancy's walking around with a microphone. We're going to make sure we use it so that everyone on the live stream can hear as well.
So I'm just wondering if the survivor, when in the film the other day, there were two survivors, were either one of them on your ride?
Yes, one of them was on our ride.
Okay.
Marcel?
Yeah, Marcel, what? And yes. However, it was 97 degrees. So he was on a tandem bike with Jonathan and biked maybe a small portion with us. He started with us, let's just say that. And actually, he was the one in the where I showed the video of Jonathan. He was standing next to Jonathan. And it was a really special moment because he had survived 5 camps. And had survived this camp and was willing to come back. And it was interesting to sort of hear him talk about it and connect to it that morning and feel that peace. So for those that don't know, the film, it's not yet finished. We got to show a preview of it It will, once it comes out and actually is formal, we'll probably show it again here once it's finalized, and we appreciate any of the feedback that people have already given, so thank you. Other questions?
So thank you. That was a lovely presentation, and I saw the film last week, which really has been sticking with me. So thank you for that too. I know it would be totally different, but has it come up in discussion to maybe have a ride here for people who can't go there, bringing the community together, raising awareness, something like that? And also, do you have, is there a situation where people who do want to go to the Ride for the Living could go through this JCC? Are there people coming together to do that?
Two great questions. So let me start with the first one. So Lindsay and I had actually planned on going on the ride in 2020. We had talked to Jonathan. We had, of course, things happen. World changes. They converted the ride to a global Ride for the Living. So annually, in addition to the Ride for the Living, there's a global Ride for the Living, and different communities either organize themselves or individuals join. I've joined for the last couple years, and it's basically committing to riding 60 miles during the month of the ride, which both raises awareness as well as raises funds. So the ride itself is a fundraiser, and I actually am looking out, and I know that some of you actually donated to Lindsay and my fundraising efforts, which we really appreciate. They raise a lot of money through this, and so that is an opportunity for individuals to do. Let me think about how that might look for us as an organization. I'll definitely turn to Nancy with thinking through that a little bit more, but it's something we've discussed. The second piece of us organizing a trip. While we were there, we had a lot of conversations about the idea of bringing a group, which would be absolutely lovely, and I would actually do it such that we probably went to Warsaw first, and then Krakow, and then potentially go to Hungary right after to go to the Budapest JCC, because it's another example of a different way that Jewish life is being born. So that was sort of the idea of a trip, and I have a friend who did a similar type trip while we were there, so I got a chance to talk to him about it. It is not planned for us to do it this year, though I know Lauren from our staff is actually looking to do the ride, and we're talking about the following year putting together a group. Now, I know there are people interested this year, and so Rabbi Mark is going. It's not like a trip organized by the JCC or organized by Bonei Shalom, but we would bring together the group of people that were interested, and we'll probably send that out to everyone to try to connect people who might be interested in going this year, and then look to potentially do maybe a larger trip for the following year. When is the ride? The ride is the beginning of July always. It's during the Krakow Jewish Festival. Now, there's a conversation to potentially pull it apart from then, but people really like going because of this festival that's happening. It also makes things really challenging in Krakow. Housing, or like getting hotels, is really challenging with 30,000 people descending on the city. So, yes?
In Poland, did you encounter any revival or persistence of the Yiddish language or literature?
Resistance towards it.
No, persistence.
Oh.
Because that was, of course, Yiddish was very important in before World War II, as was Yiddish literature.
So when we were at the Galicia Museum, there was definitely books in Yiddish there. But we didn't see or feel, sort of the rebirth of Yiddish in North America has been fascinating. I didn't feel and see it there, but I didn't look for it. So I can't give you a great answer in terms of that, but it was interesting to see that there were books in Yiddish at that museum when we were there.
Can you expound on what this survivor talked about?
It was very short, what he said, but it was just it was sort of a recognition, the fact that the group of people were here and willing to do the ride, and to feel like life goes on. And that this was, I mean, the reason why he does this ride is he feels connected to Jewish life being reborn, not just harking on the past. It was very clear that that was really important to him, and why this particular thing, it's you know, what's interesting is you have the March of the Living, which is you walk from Auschwitz to Birkenau, and then you go and fly to Israel. And so you think Jewish life is dead there. So it's like, yep, that's where we went to, and Jewish life is dead. This is a really like reframing of it, and I think that that's what really called to him in particular. It's
I'm coming.
I don't know how to put this, but in today's world of affluence and the Jewish festival here as an example, Jews and non-Jews participating, with all due respect to the organizers, I'm just curious why there wouldn't be more than 100 or 150 cyclers.
So
is it limited?
No, that's a great question. This year was actually really small, and the war in Ukraine was a big part of that. I mean, we didn't make our decision to go until about a month prior, and it was the smallest registration they had ever had for it, and it was also, remember where we were last, like, let's try to put ourselves, it's almost impossible, but where we were in terms of COVID in the world and reopening. So the high point, I think, had 350 riders. I think there is a limit in terms of the logistics and organizing and those pieces, and they sort of hit it at around there. I think they might be open to more, but it's, you know, you hit against the hotel problem, which is pretty significant. But yeah, that's why it was smaller. The only reason they were really successful is luckily there was 60 people who came from a synagogue in LA together. And so that actually saved them in some ways this year.
So if they did bifurcate it from the other Jewish festival that's going on in time, that might be one.
Yeah. So the question or comment was if they bifurcated from the Jewish Culture Festival, they might be able to grow it. And the answer is that's one of the considerations that they're definitely looking at. And you know, as a person who organizes events, I definitely was looking at the pieces of how things were being done. It was like, you know, opening up the doors that shouldn't be opened. So Paul.
Jonathan, you talked about the complexity of going to Jewish restaurants and listening to Jewish klezmer bands that were not run by Jews. Could you say a little bit more about that?
So I think part of the interesting thing that I found was I tried to relate it to here, you know, who here would put on the Jewish festival if we weren't here? It just seemed like so foreign to me in some ways that this was happening. And the complexity in my mind was what made people choose that was what they wanted to do, or this restaurant owner buy this restaurant that they know is, you know, every night a klezmer band plays and it's a non-Jewish owner. Now, it could just be business for that person, but it's probably something more. And so that's the complexity, I think, was I didn't quite understand the motivations. And in talking to the deputy director of the Jewish Culture Festival, he gave his motivation, because I asked him, you know, it was that he feels it's really important that this part of Polish history is not dead. that is remembered, and Jews were a critical and important part of the culture of Poland for so long. So that was his motivator. I'm sure everyone would have something different. It's a great question.
Elizabeth, the last one.
Okay.
Well, just to carry on that, do you think that they're succeeding in their mission with this culture festival? I mean, it's fun, it's drawing lots of people, but are they actually succeeding?
Are they succeeding? Depends on, well, having talked to the festival people, they would probably answer no. Because they felt like it's, they're not really telling the story of who we are now and like what is. And I think they are. I mean, I think the fact that they're making it possible for Jewish people to have a level of pride again in being Jewish. And I think a piece of that I related to the work we've done here. So I don't think Boulder has always been a place where people can be proud to be Jewish. I think people, and I'm seeing the nods from people who've been here for a while, and I came here about 25 years ago for the first time. It was not the kind of place where it is now. I think the fact that the Jewish festival is there and is on Pearl Street and is present in the community, the fact that this place is such a convener for everyone and all people in the community, as well as the Jewish community, I think is critical. And I think that the Jewish festival there does the same thing. I don't think it is the only way. And I think that having a festival, having the JCC Krakow, I didn't even go into the complexities of the Jewish community there, which that is really complex. Sort of government and other relations that are there. But I think, yeah, typical Jewish. But I do think that it has a really important place, and I'm glad it still exists. I wonder about its future and the funding of it, because it definitely this year was smaller than it had ever been because of some changes in funding and COVID. So I do have concerns about its sustainability in the future. Well, thank you so much for coming. I'll be around, and if you want to take a look, I brought a couple books. One is the book about the Galicia Museum, which I'm talking with the executive director there about potentially bringing an exhibit here, possibly just because it's a really interesting thing. So a couple of interesting books if you want to take a look, and I'll be around to answer any questions.